Welcome to the ZoomInfo Labs podcast. I'm Ben Salzman.
And I'm Millie Beetham. Today, we've got Mike Madsen, Senior Manager of Revenue Operations at Workday, joining the podcast.
Mike shares his insights on building scalable go-to-market strategies, the role of AI in sales, and why having a strong data infrastructure is critical for success.
He also gives us a behind-the-scenes look at Workday's Demand Squad program and how it's driving innovation through experimentation. Let's get into it.
Welcome to the ZoomInfo Labs podcast. I'm Ben Salzman.
And I'm Millie Beetham.
Today we have a very special guest, the one and only Mike Madsen from Workday. He's a Senior Manager of Revenue Operations, and we're going to talk to you all about architecting your go-to-market, driving efficiency within the org, all of the sort of extensive career that you've had building out revenue operations. First, how are you doing, Mike?
Yeah, doing well. We're really excited to be here, guys. It's an honor to be a part of this podcast. You guys have been doing really cool, seasons these past couple ones, and I'm just really humbled to be kind of joining the likes of the folks that you've been interviewing in the previous one. So, really excited to be here.
Awesome, love it. We're going to talk all about your journey implementing a lot of these sort of innovative pipeline methodologies or expertise around optimizing go-to-market. And especially at a global company and a really prominent one like Workday. It's very, very exciting. But maybe, you can sort of start with just a bit of an introduction on who you are and, where you came from, et cetera.
Yeah. So I've been in this kind of go-to-market RevOps kind of operator role for about 6-7 years now. I run a team that focuses on some of our kind of big transformational initiatives within our kind of pipeline operations side. And so for me, my background came from, PM and project management and leading like these large transformational initiatives across different areas of the business. And then over time, it led me into getting exposure to RevOps and to ultimately get exposure to go-to-market strategy. And from there, it's just kind of like growing my career across the go-to-market space. So been a really awesome ride so far. A lot of runway, I think, left in there. But just a little bit about me.
And how did you go about achieving that expertise? You went from PMO and you moved into RevOps. What were you doing? How did you develop that true go-to-market strategic expertise that I know you have? Because Mike and I have worked together for so long now, right? I've seen you in the field. I've seen you doing your operator thing.
Yeah. So my background had been in project management, kind of more of a traditional PM type of role. That's kind of where I started. I was at a company that hired me in, was part of this rotation program, got exposure to a lot of different types of initiatives. And one of the main things I got exposure to was leading technology implementations. So I actually led an implementation of Workday. That was my actual exposure to the Workday company that I was ultimately parlayed into coming to the company. And from there, I essentially wanted to get more and more exposure to the kind of sales go-to-market space. And one of the big things that I'm a big proponent of is always learning. I have this mantra that never stop learning. And so for me, I took on the self-initiative to really learn as much as I can about go-to-market, about technology, how it's being deployed in the go-to-market space. And I was able to kind of get exposure to a tool that I think a lot of folks are familiar with is with outreach. And so my first kind of step into kind of the operator go-to-market space, parlaying for project management, was leading the implementation of outreach across the Workday company. And so from there, I started transitioning from not necessarily just a traditional PM who does project plans and timelines and, dependencies and so on and so forth, but really becoming an expert of how do you use this technology to accelerate pipeline, to drive conversion, to improve workflows, to essentially start doing automation. And that was really kind of the step into becoming a quote unquote expertise in this space.
That's amazing. Shout out to Manny. Thanks for being on season 2. When we interviewed him, I said about as much about my career and how it had started was really having this tool, right, that had come in, created a category, and then this opportunity to say well, what does it do? And the fact that sort of Manny has coached up both of us by default into sort of these go-to-market strategists is such a testament to who he is and everything that he's built. On sort of that similar note, taking it maybe one step further, I would say you are classically multidisciplinary. How is being sort of that multidisciplinary leader changing your leadership style, changing how you approach your work and your team every single day?
Yeah, so as I say, like for me, it's like never stop learning. So in this space of AI and how to use it within your workflows is like front and center for me in terms of like how I continue to like understand the market, understand how we play in that market, and how then that cascades into the team and upskilling folks into this new space that we're all working in. I subscribe from like a leadership kind of perspective to style as like the player coach model. I've been in the trenches doing kind of these large transformational initiatives, like I said, outreach and many different other ones around contact strategies in terms of workflow strategies, automation strategies, just go-to-market kind of segmentation strategies. And so because of that, I've been able to, essentially be able to kind of walk the walk versus in some other places, maybe folks don't necessarily have that hands-on keyboard experience. And so for me and like, my leadership within the team is ensuring that at any given day, if someone's out, if someone can't, come in for whatever reason, like I'm able to pick up people's work and kind of drive it myself. And so I think that's been a big part of my leadership and success is really like showing the team walking the walk is like, this is something I've done and you all can do it as well.
I love that. I share that same thing for our team. I think we both do, but it's not just like if someone's out, I can pick it up, but more also like I'm also willing to do every job and like, I'll do it. I'm going to try to do it as well or better than anyone on the team. And I hope everyone else feels that same way about every other job. So
yeah, there's no work that I would like expect my team to do that I like wouldn't do myself or, potentially could do myself. So I think that's like really important, at least from me in my career, like stepping in from an IC into leading an actual global team is really being that actual like person that I can work with you and brainstorm and workshop, like, let's solve this problem, let's build this strategy, and really like, not lose that expertise.
It's fascinating. I think there is this like, as people are discussing sort of leadership styles and organizational structures and how to lead a team, build a team, etc. In the age of AI, I'm starting to hear this trend or this red thread around this idea that like you must be an expert, you must be an operator. Like the idea of there just being sort of middle management, right? Or just leaders, right? That's got to go away, right? You have to continue to have some sort of level of expertise to be able to be the one directing the agents or being able to be creative enough to build out, right, that agentic AI workflow or automation or use case, whatever. And I think that's such a great showcase. Like you're such a great showcase of like the next CEOs, right? The next executive leaders are going to have that mindset of wanting to be a player coach, wanting to be an operator. I think it's critical of those people at this point. Otherwise, agentic AI agents are coming for your job, maybe, right? Like if you don't have that expertise, you don't consistently believe that that's important.
Yeah.
Does that mean that the agents are really the ones coming for your jobs? Yeah, probably.
Yeah, I think there's a debate out there for sure, and I take the position, which I think a lot of others do, is like there's going to be a blend between agents and humans, and I think that's kind of like our Workday's position as well. And but yeah, I don't disagree with the idea that you as an operator need to really understand how this technology is going to disrupt not only like the way that you personally work or your team personally works, but how it's disrupting the actual way that like buyers are buying and how go-to-market's being designed and essentially how workflows are going to be designed. Because if you're not like figuring that out and you're not someone who's really kind of tapped in, you're going to be at a disadvantage because there's people like me that are like fundamentally like all in on this stuff and figuring out how to kind of operationalize it at scale. So
100%. The next question I had was, are there any words of advice you have for folks who are just starting on their professional journey? And that's exactly it. It's like pursue that, like find the thing that you're excited about, become that operator, become that expert.
Yeah, for me, for like folks coming out of college or new to career or looking to make a pivot, I kind of still go back to the statement I made as like be super willing to learn as much as possible. There's like an endless amount of resources out there now. The GPT types of solutions have a wealth of knowledge as well that you can learn a ton just by asking people questions, asking agents questions. And I think that's kind of a huge focus for folks coming out of school. I think the other big piece for me that set me up for success is I had a mentor that when I got hired out of business school and kind of went through this kind of development program that I kind of alluded to a bit before, I was rotating between different subsidiaries, getting different exposure to different initiatives and parts of the job. And I was talking with him one day, and I was just like saying, hey, I'm super eager. I want to grow. I'm really interested in like becoming, a senior leader, running teams, X, Y, Z. And one of the things that he said to me that literally stands with me today that I still never forget is this idea of you need to be able to say yes to a lot of work, even if that work isn't necessarily like fun or use the term sexy. He's like, you have to do the shit work really well in order to get exposure to the complex, cool, sexy work. And that's something that I think like all people coming out of school looking to get into a new career, that if you have a leader that says, I need you to go do this analytical work to go build a slide for me because I'm going to go present this information to a VP who may ask a question related to this data point and I need it in my back pocket, you need to be able to execute that like flawlessly. There's so many people who may say, oh, that data is not necessarily needed. The VP may never even ask the question. I'm not the one presenting this information. Like, it's not even gonna be seen. Like, who cares? And I think those are the folks that maybe aren't able to be successful early is because they're not executing at like grunt level work. So that's a big thing for me that I literally still think about all the time is do the grunt work like flawlessly.
I love that. The grit, like you still gotta have grit and you have to be willing to do that if you are gonna move forward, right? Because you get the good comes from putting in the hard work. Yeah,
Totally.
And Mike, one thing I think that I have gathered from interacting with you over time is one of the things that you've done is learn a lot from vendors. It feels like I think a lot of, not necessarily us, but at the whole market. Like, I think a lot of buyers, which you are in many cases sort of across the table from sellers, think of it as like an adversarial thing. I think it feels like you really leaned into like, what can I actually take away from all of these relationships and like, invest in myself.
Oh, totally.
Through that. Talk to us a little bit about how, is that intentional?
Yeah, it's definitely intentional. I mean, going back to your statement with like Manny and outreach, like at the time, like that was like, fundamentally game changing. And so I went all in and like learning as much as possible, not only just like how the tool works and its, technical workflows and things like that, but like how does this actually support the sales org? One of the things that I think people who are also in my space, I'll think about all the time is that like, how are the things like tools or technology that we're touching, like actually generating revenue? Like that's at the end of the day, what we're doing. We're supporting the sales teams to generate more revenue. And in some cases also try to minimize cost by efficiency gains and so on and so forth. So I went all in and learning how does this tool achieve those goals, partnering with the outreach team, understanding their road mapping, what problems we're running into and how we can kind of solve those, and expanding that into relationships with, ZoomInfo and, the other kind of vendors that are out there to just learn as much about like what your technology is doing and how is it going to ultimately serve those two purposes, which is help me generate more revenue for the sales team and help me kind of minimize, costs and increase margins. And so I've really been like ear to the ground to as many different, providers out there, startups as well. There's a lot of startups who would love to kind of throw their technology at you and see you react to it so they can kind of build off of it. So I talk with lots of different startups, seeing what they got out there. So I think that's kind of just going back to the learning part, like always have your ear to the ground and making sure you know what the technology is being built right now and how, again, it's being applied back to your business.
Yeah. I think it's just such a different approach that you could take, even if you're not in RevOps, right? Like, say you're not in revenue operations, like you as a leader touch technology, like use that technology to your advantage as an opportunity to learn, or use that technology space as an opportunity to learn. Like, what are those systems? How are those being built? How are they being changed? Can you get in on the review process for that? And how much can you learn from those vendors, right? There's such an opportunity there that I think some people like miss.
Yeah. I mean, me selfishly it's like, I want the vendor to build the product how like I want it to be built, essentially, right? Like if it can like solve our problems, then that's great for like our business. Like why wouldn't I try to invest time with these individuals who are interested in my opinion and interested in kind of my point of view, to help shape it to kind of solve like our business problems? I think that's a no-brainer to me.
We haven't spent enough time on that, but like extending your leverage, like cross-functional, internally, clearly helpful with external parties, partners, et cetera. It's critical. Mike, talk to us a little bit about what are some of the core principles that you think the best leaders apply as it relates to go-to-market strategy?
Yeah, I think the ones I kind of touched on is the leaders that I see that are like really effective at being able to implement strategies and ultimately implement change across companies, because that's kind of really what this is implementing like really transformational change, are the ones that really understand, again, like what the point of all this is. The point is to more or less help the sales teams, or the individuals who are essentially services, the individuals who are generating revenue, and in establishing relationships with those individuals directly is critical. The other side then is on the margin side, so the operations side. So for go-to-market or for RevOps, my customer is the sales organization. Everything I'm doing is in service of them, and similarly, the go-to-market leaders as well. So you can debate MQL conversion or how impressions are in search and things like that. Those are all important, but at the end of the day, it is, how is this strategy we're implementing going to drive revenue? If we're going to go purchase an agent, great, it could reduce costs. It could potentially not increase revenue at all. Like, is that serving the need of the business? And so I think the leaders that I see, they're critically laser focused on those two aspects.
Love it. What do you think that the best go-to-market folks do? What do they get right that other people get wrong?
Yeah, I think for this one, for me, what I've seen, similar to just really understanding who your customer is, which is like, it's sales org and the people generating revenue, but it is also being very much, hands-on in terms of the technology shift going on right now, for sure. Like, I think the people who are investing time, resourcing, and energy on AI and the applications of them and workflows and agents and so on and so forth are going to be like the winners for sure. So I think the folks that are shying away from it, or ultimately are, not necessarily fully, well versed in it, are going to be at a disadvantage. And so I think those are going to be, the people who do, a successful, career and go to market, is figuring out how to implement that. I think at the same time, it's individuals that aren't just going to like deploy AI for the sake of it, because it's like the hot thing right now, right? My point of view is that it's going to be use case dependent. It has to be use case dependent. You got to be really clear, like, you're going to deploy this agent to solve this unique problem, or drive this unique workflow. It can't be a peanut butter spread. So I think the individuals that are really driving at the leadership level are also laser focused on understanding that concept, that it has to be deployed within these go-to-market teams. We're not going to go replace the entire sales org. Inbound isn't just going to be run by agents. Like, it has to be very strategic and use case dependent.
Yeah. Shout out to Manus, DeepSeek's agent over the weekend, that like I couldn't recreate any of the use case demos. Couldn't recreate one of them. And again, back to general agent, right? We've got general operator as well. Like, the way that AI is going to be deployed to be successful to drive revenue is truly single use case, the sharing of thought, like intelligence back and forth from the company and from the model, right? And building that into something super specific that's going to solve that problem.
Yeah.
It's measurable, it's actionable, it can be improved bit by bit. I love that perspective. I really love that perspective.
Yeah, because I think, if you try to just go and like deploy to an SDR org and it might work, but you're going to get a ton of resistance too. Like, if you're not solving like specific pain point that the sales business or the SDR business is experiencing, or you're not solving like the buyer's problem that they're having, you're kind of missing the point. So I think it has to be in step with these individuals, or it's not going to be as successful as you think.
Fascinating. Andrew Riesenfeld was on the pod, who's our CEO of go-to-market, and he was saying, exactly echoing the sentiment of like the best leaders must be the ones that are taking note, et cetera. But one of the other things he mentioned, which I'm interested to hear your perspective, there may be a right time to say we've got to pull it all back and start over from an architecture perspective. Do you think there's a right time and place for that?
Yeah, it's a good question. From a timing perspective, I think people have to move fast. It's like, now is the time, in my opinion. But to your point, I think when we go back to the AI comment, like, the fundamental thing that has to be solved for is your data infrastructure. I think third-party data has been very accessible and there's lots of value there. I think first-party data has been underutilized across a lot of companies, and that is because they live in potentially different data silos, warehouses, what have you, across, sales, SDRs, CX, product, marketing. I think fundamentally you have to solve at the baseline the infrastructure of your data to then be able to transact on that and either build models yourselves, work with vendors that can maybe support you, how those get pushed then downstream to end users to actually rationalize and use. I think the data infrastructure has to happen like immediately before you go and just, again, turn on an agent to go run your workflow.
Here, Mike, 100%. It's so interesting. Like we, have had a few other operators like yourself and saying the same thing, saying exactly the same thing. You must go and build the data infrastructure out. None of this on top works. Yeah. I know it because I've seen it. I've built the automation and it comes out the other side and it doesn't see the impact that we're hoping for. And the problem is at the foundation.
Yeah, I think you're at a disservice if you're like limiting your data scope, essentially, right? You can be, and maybe this works for some companies. I think at our level, it just isn't, scalable to be able to just like pick a third-party vendor to like give us this one data point and then exclude like all this other CRM data or all this other like, first-party data and just be reliant on this account is trending or has this signal. Like, I think you're going to be significantly underutilizing this entire like strategy. So you have to have like a really cohesive strategy across all the layers of data and having it kind of running simultaneously across then all the go-to-market teams. Marketing needs to be using the same data set that product and go-to-market and CX and whomever else are using because the use cases are slightly different, but the data infrastructure needs to be essentially looking at the same buying signals, the same, deal loss signals. They have to be.
Yeah. Let's go farther on AI and sort of practical applications for you all at Workday. What are some of the sort of breakthroughs that you've had? Obviously, there's just a huge amount of discussion around it, but like practical, real world, we've implemented this. It was awesome because of X.
Yeah. So, in our space, we've been doing a form of AI for actually a number of years now. So ML has been kind of one of the more traditional ways that kind of like AI has been kind of utilized. And so we've been using ML across all areas of the funnel, whether you think like lead scoring models that have been built, account scoring models that have been built, deal risk review kind of things that have been built, customer sat types of things have been built. So we've been running like ML for a number of years, and those have been transformational at the time. Like I don't think that was very commonplace, 5-6 years ago. I think what has become more prevalent is the providers out there that have like significantly advanced to LLMs. Now you can take all this large data that is scattering across different places, putting it into a centralized location, and then being able to use kind of the LLMs to essentially understand and provide insights on the data is really like the groundbreaking thing that we've been kind of, deploying for our business is taking data and essentially translated it into something that an individual knows the actions and insights they should be taking. You can have an account score that says this account is, 89, for example, because it's in your industry that works well. You had, a bunch of demos. You haven't had a lost opportunity in 5 years. Like there's these factors and attributes that ML can give you, but the salesperson always responds like, well, what do I do with that? What's the next action I should be taking? And that's kind of where LLMs and, in theory, then translated into agents can actually then take the insights, distill them down on what you actually should go do, and then actually transact on those actions. So for us, we've been deploying that into like inbound processes. We've been deploying it into different types of account profiling processes, working upstream with the marketing groups as well. So that's kind of where our main focus is right now is transacting off of the data, pushing insights, and then the next cycle of that would be ultimately determining which of those actions should be taken by a person or a digital person. And that's kind of where, we're currently at right now.
I want to take that through to, we could talk about a lot of these different programs, some of these frameworks and architecture that you've built at Workday. Will you tell our audience a little bit about like demand ops and demand squad and like how you've applied the scientific method essentially to building go-to-market programs and architecting go-to-market at Workday broadly?
Yeah, no, I'm really honored at Workday to have the opportunity to lead this team that helps kind of run a program that we have been using and managing since 2021. It's called Demand Squads, which, you and I have done a little bit of presentations on before. Its concept is, which you kind of touched on, is how do you use the scientific method, or what we would say like a testing, space, a learning methodology on understanding how you go from there's a problem that we're identifying in our business. We believe we have a solution, which is essentially a hypothesis, similar to the scientific method, developing those hypotheses to whatever we think the solution is, and then actually building a test to then validate your hypothesis, building a cohort, building the strategy. This is all in production as well. And essentially then running those tests in a kind of sprint agile methodology way to measure the effectiveness of that test. From there, right, is determining, was that test successful? Was it unsuccessful? Did it prove what we thought it was going to prove? And then from there, what we essentially try to determine is, should we start scaling this into the operating model? So that's essentially the outcome of a lot of this test is, yes, it helps generate revenue and helps improve processes and cycle times and efficiencies, but ultimately, did it actually fundamentally shift the operating model? That's a measurement that we track. But yeah, it's trying to take product agile methodology, a lot of kind of like analysts, like scientific method, A/B testing kind of concepts, and put it into like the go-to-market sales space that hasn't really been very common in go-to-market. And so we set out to achieve that goal, back in 2021 during COVID. I think it was kind of like a push that said, hey, the market shift. No one knows what's happening. Like, how are you going to understand buyer behavior? Should we be talking about COVID? Should you shy away from it? We stood up this concept of like, let's just start like testing all these concepts, and we just put structure around it. And so now it's been a really successful program that, I have an awesome team that runs it. And, we've been having really, I'm really proud of all the results that we've done.
Talk to us about what are some of the examples of some of the programs? Like, what have you spun through the Demand Squad program and then spun out, or maybe some of the failures as well?
Yeah, it's been a lot of failures, which I think is great, because then you fail fast. I mean, the concept too is, how do you go from traditional big bets that are like these big transformational initiatives and blend that with like really fast cycles that you can essentially like test something, improve it, or fail.
Yeah.
So that's like, the blend of the, those two concepts. But some of the tests is really like in the earlier days, like testing a lot of different inbound workflows. So simple things like someone coming to our website, how does that get routed to the inbound team? Is there a better routing process that essentially increases speed to lead or increases follow-up rates? Things like that. So we did tons of like workflow, inbound lead, architecture types of tests to see efficiencies. Back in the day too, this is before GPT solutions, and I know you were also doing some of this stuff with you, but we were testing so many different types of copy. And so we were building these convoluted dynamic triggers that were looking at first-party data and CRM and other types of signals we had access to essentially populate email copy before there was any GPT solution or any type of Gen AI types of solution doing that. And those were different testing that we were running during COVID to see, again, messaging. So we've done tons of messaging tests, upstream tests with marketing in terms of changing different web designs, and, driving different traffic strategies. And then a lot of the ones we do that are more focused today is like in deal cycle tests. Like, how do we revive a deal that's been stalled? What are the 5 attributes that we've seen successfully move a deal forward that we want to deploy to this cohort and validate, does this work in this industry or within these personas or these company sizes? So it's across the board, like top of funnel all the way down to bottom of funnel. But it's been really around in current state, how to kind of accelerate deals and drive kind of deal performance, and then also all the AI use cases. And so we use Demand Squads to be a testing ground for all the AI kind of agent types of workflows as well. And that's just been, at the forefront these days.
That's amazing. I was going to say we hadn't caught up for a while, but I was really excited to find out whether or not Demand Squads, as it's like this hub of innovation at Workday. I was like, I'm assuming they're just going to point that straight at AI. So it's great to hear that that's what's happening.
Yeah. I mean, it's putting infrastructure and some, accountability and sponsorship around innovation. Innovation happens everywhere. Like, I'm sure anyone who's listening, there's SDRs doing all these awesome things that are better than the baseline of what they're doing today. It's just figuring out how you like scale that concept across your go-to-market. And then that's what we've done with Demand Squads, is just putting structure and scaling innovation.
Will you talk to us a little bit about that intersection of like getting it from like, yes, we've trialed, the test is good, right? The hypothesis was right, and getting it to, okay, great, we're going to go and scale it across the operations.
Yeah, that's always the part that the rubber meets the road, is being able to kind of, scale the test itself. So yeah, we have a partnership with all the teams that we work with to typically kind of do some of the transformational initiatives. My team kind of owns a lot of it anyway, so it kind of naturally fits in the fast cycles and the big bets. And so we just go through our normal process, kind of getting those things baked into the cycle times if it requires like technical resourcing, or our IT or BT teams need to like change drastically any types of systems. So it kind of falls into those cycles. But the benefit is we've already proven the concept, and so there's not so much selling in horse racing, so to speak, going on with like our idea is bad or better than your ideas. Like we already have a ton of data that proves that this concept works, like real in production data. It is limited in terms of the cohorts that we build it around, but that helps us accelerate the cycle time to getting things deployed. So that's been really the success that we've had, is proving these out with data versus just someone's gut or what they think it should be done. The data really helps.
I mean, I just even think that the fact that the innovation and the breeding ground for this is like within RevOps, where then they can go and deploy immediately. Like that's a brilliant tidbit that's like really actionable from our audience and the listener's perspective.
Yeah.
Pretty well, I think, today that there's this conversation going on online around like go-to-market engineer, go-to-market architect.
Yeah.
Generally, that there's this sort of emerging role or this emerging function that does a lot of the things that you've shared, right? That Demand Squads is set out to achieve, that RevOps supports, etc. The role is defined as someone who is defining or codifying data-driven targeting, ICP definitions, defining the relevant signals for an organization, building those audiences, aligning the teams around plays and programs, and truly like architecting the workflow or the process. We're seeing this new function. We've either met lots of people or we're starting to meet more of them in tech. You think this role is necessary? Do you agree with this positioning of this? What's your take? What's your perspective on it?
Yeah, my hot take on it. I think the title itself is a new title. I think the work that I guess this title is kind of touching, I think has been happening for a while. The things that we've been talking about that I know you've been also exposed to is, building infrastructure around workflows, around architecting lead, workflows, and understanding then how that then translate into prospecting strategies and, building lists and segmentation, all those things. Like that's been happening for a really long time. I don't really know if it was called, the engineering or the architecture role itself. What I think about is like the term sales enablement has only been around for 10 years, but sellers have been enabled since like the dawn of time. Yeah.
Somebody was training them and coaching them, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
So I think this work has been happening. I think it's nice to maybe get a new flavor of what you called it. Like we called it at the time, like demand strategy or like demand architecture. We call them these different kind of these concepts. But I think it's fundamentally needed for sure. Like the work is needed, especially in the age of agentic workflows. Like that's fundamentally front and center. Like you have to be able to figure out how to solve that, and you need to have resourcing that is solving that, not just from like a technical architecture perspective, but from like a business, owner perspective, really understand like how does this actually work in the sales org or the marketing teams or CX and what have you. So I do think it's really important. The title, it's a cool title. So I guess the other part I've seen is that if that's like an AE's or an SDR's role, if that's what we're talking about, like they do prospecting, they sell, and they also do workflow engineering. Yeah, that's an interesting concept. I'm not entirely sure if that's scalable or not. It could be. But for me, like you have to have a dedicated person that spends all their time building the infrastructure. I think blending the selling part in with the infrastructure part is might be a hard thing longer term.
Yeah, or it's just many years off. It feels like we talked about multidisciplinary, right? Like being a RevOps. Being like a revenue operator is inherently multidisciplinary. you don't meet a lot of people. Like there's not that many people in the workforce who are like supremely multidisciplinary. And I think to be that role, you would have to be and just have quite a varied skill set. And I don't think we necessarily have those people today, but maybe in the future we do.
Yeah, I mean, skill set wide, but even like the business case, so like you even think back in the days of outreach, we like deployed these sequences, right? Like build these complex workflows, building your count list, your ICP, your contacts, whatever, and you're sending those over then to a sequence automatically. So there's been no human intervention yet. And then let's automate that stuff, like first emails automated or follow-up emails automated. And at the end of the day, like I built that, so like I'm kind of like prospecting, right? Like the seller hasn't even like actually done anything yet. So I get that conceptually. I think it only goes so far, at least in current state, because at the end of the day, there's going to be a person at the end of that email who wants to either understand more about the product, talk to an actual person. I think once the technology gets to a point where it can just feel like an actual human, I can see that conceptually working. But at that point, like sales and fundamentally like isn't really selling with a human anymore. So you're kind of just going back to the.
Then we got the agents just talking to one another.
And then you could have a buyer agent. Like I could have my own avatar that understands what I want to buy, that talks to the other kind of company's avatar buyer or seller, and then they're kind of, which is the future, and that sounds really interesting. I just don't think in current state the dialogue around this concept is there yet.
Mm-hmm. But potentially, I guess, like, let's go a couple steps further on that then. Like, what is the risk if potentially that is the future and maybe these people architect or lay the groundwork, right, for that? Like, what's the risk to businesses who choose not to centralize a function in this way, even if it looks more like the demand squads or demand architecture roles that you've seen?
Yeah, I think there should be a central body, and whether it's centralized or maybe it's kind of, sits at least with under like an operation team, and there's maybe different flavors of that. There has to be people who are focusing on this fundamentally, or like I said before, you're going to be at a significant disadvantage. So today, right, like all the workflows and then architecture is built, and then essentially there's still a blend of a human plus an agent now still doing kind of the last mile, so to speak. I think that has to be the working model today. Like we were just talking about a second ago. In the future, that last mile may be 20% human and 80% agent, but today it's reverse for sure. But you need to have a centralized team building the infrastructure and building those workflows.
Yep. Back to building the use cases one by one, right?
Exactly.
Getting them right every single time.
It's use case dependent.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Amazing. I think that's really, really unique perspective, and I would actually argue that probably many folks have not taken it beyond maybe the online conversation on LinkedIn, have really not thought about the practical application. So your perspective from the enterprise, I think, is really, really useful, Mike. Building that central function, like, talk to us a bit about like how you guys got this sort of centralized function and built some of these like capacities into Workday. Like, it's not like it wasn't a very large enterprise when you got there, right? It's just continued to grow.
Yeah. Silos,
Cross-functional collaboration, right? Like, how do you make that happen at an enterprise? How does that come to life?
Yeah, it's fun. That's what I could say there. Yeah, I think like I said before, I'm really fortunate just like kind of stepping into kind of the RevOps at a time where the ZoomInfos and the outreaches of the world were like just becoming kind of more prevalent, and so that was like the first step into like architecting workflows. I think I've heard Manny say a ton of time like workflows are what's important, for sales organizations, and I don't disagree with that. So we really leaned in the early days of operation in the workflows. It wasn't just let's roll out these tools and then say, great, we did our job and it's live in production and let the sellers figure it out. Mm-hmm. We really spent our time, and myself spent tons of time figuring out how do you design these workflows to enhance, again, productivity and then ultimately help us generate more revenue. And so I think it was more organic than necessarily like significantly planned that we need to kind of centralize this architecture kind of concept and, having this engineering concept built into go-to-market. I think it was just a product of realizing the solutions that we're leveraging had so much upside and potential that we needed to invest time in that. And then over time was in working cross-functionally with your system admins and your actual like enablement teams and your marketing orgs who essentially are kind of more top of the funnel but have influence in how those are passed through in the workflows, and then just driving tons of cross-functional collaboration. So that's where I spent most of my time in those early days, is the cross-functional aspect of it, because there wasn't this cohesive concept of like an end-to-end workflow from marketing all the way down to, you know, the customer success side. So I think that's been really what it is really organic, and it was just kind of a timely thing that we really realized that these workflows were super important and we needed to operationalize them as much as possible.
So you can either lean into that and make change, or you can see it as disruptive and walk away from it. Sounds like at Workday you guys leaned in. It just sounds like an incredible culture to support that. Tell us a little bit about that. Like, they made that happen for you guys?
I mean, it's all dependent on, you know, the thing that you're doing is providing value back to the business. And so we can show, hey, these workflows that we spent a bunch of time on operationalizing have improved conversion rates, speed to lead, you know, meeting book rates. Like, everything is predicated on like the outcomes of all this stuff. Like, there's a no-brainer than, you know, VP, RevOps, head of RevOps leader, whomever is like, yeah, go do more of that. If you're generating more book meetings and those are converting more into pipeline, like, that's a no-brainer. So I think that's really where we got support and resourcing from, was proving these things out early on and then just never looking back.
On the other side of that, can you describe, and we can cut it if you don't like the answer, what are some of the biggest failures that you all have experimented with, either with AI or without, where you were like, that was an interesting learning?
Yeah, good question. Some of the failures, I think some of the failures have been, and this is just kind of learning as I've grown my career, is that thinking that some of the workflows and a lot of the architecture and infrastructure that we've built in like the States is transferable outside the US. I think that's probably, some of the early day failures that we learned pretty quickly, is that it is fundamentally different once you step into Europe. And even within Europe, the countries are fundamentally different. Going into Japan and APAC, it's just drastically different. And so lots of different, you know, designs and system, you know, concepts that we built were just ineffective in those other areas because we didn't really understand how a seller works in those markets. And I think that was a learning I could probably share, is that you have to, going back to what I said before, like, know who your customer is, which in my world is the sales org, and then knowing that the sales team isn't, you know, a singular body. There's individuals that are cut across different segmentations, different geos, different industries, and their needs are different. And so building those workflows, building whatever those tests were that we were doing, needed to be solving their unique problems. Yeah.
I feel like that's like in go-to-market, I think that is fundamentally, as a go-to-market tech provider, that is fundamentally the hardest thing you have to grapple with as a builder, as an engineer, as product organization. Yeah. Sales is not homogenous.
No.
Right? Like, go-to-market is not homogenous. Like, all of these different markets are touching different types of people, right? Different economies. And therefore, right, like, it's hard to build software and product for that. It's hard to go and gather all the data, but it's a must do, right? It's a must. Like, you have to keep those things like within your frame of reference to get it right.
And you said it, but it's not just about language. It's not just even about culture. Sometimes it's like whole channels like aren't even a thing in certain markets, right?
Totally. Like the infrastructure with those channels, or the spend, the budget, they're just different, right? Depending on like how much that market's growing and how much you're investing. Headcount is different, right? So all of those are, I think, significant factors when you're thinking about deploying these different strategies and these use cases. Like I said before, it has to be like very unique to like whatever that problem is, overlaying that against the industry you're operating in, the geos you're operating in, you know, the size of the companies you're trying to go after. Like, those all have to be taken into consideration.
Yeah.
But we have to do our final question. So our motif question we ask all of our guests.
Yeah.
Who's the smartest person that you know?
Yeah.
And what did you learn from them?
Yeah, I think it's a really great question. And, you know, since I kind of knew a bit about this question coming into it, I thought about it a little bit. And I, you know, thought about, you know, very intelligent people that I've met and have got to know, really successful people who've made lots of money and have, led these transformational teams. And there's tons of those out there, and I learned from a lot of them. But when I go back to the person I've learned the most from, has to be my mom. Coming from my background of, my mom was a single parent mother. She raised 2 kids outside Chicago. Perseverance and grit was like fundamentally part of her upbringing to me and my brother. And that's something that I've carried through, is just having just so much grit to, persevere from whatever I was trying to solve or go through. And I think that's the thing that I've learned the most, is working your ass off, having tons of grit, saying yes as much as possible, and then good things come from that. So yeah, when I think about who's the smartest person that I've learned the most from, it has to be my mom, and all the grit that she's instilled in me.
I love it. That's my favorite answer yet.
I was going to say, we haven't had anybody say their parent.
We've had spouse, ChatGPT, people's boss, their co-founder, all the things you might expect. And I'm always going to this question being like, it never even crossed my mind to think about, shout out mom, of course. It never crossed my mind that someone would say that.
Shout out my mom too, now that we're here.
I never thought that hadn't considered someone saying that, but it's a great answer, and it shows a lot about your mom, that you would bring that up on an AI and go-to-market podcast. She must have had a really big impact on you then.
She did. Yeah.
That's great.
I couldn't be anywhere without her, so.
I love it.
Oh, incredible answer. I do. I have to shout out my mom. I think she's our top listener by far.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Hey, Vanessa, how you doing? So for moms everywhere and go-to-market architects in the future, this has been an incredible episode. Thanks.
Yeah, I really appreciate you guys. You invited me, and again, I'm really honored to join the conversation here. And yeah, looking forward to hearing more of your speakers and learning as much as possible from them. So
thanks so much for listening to this episode of the ZoomInfo Labs podcast.
With new episodes dropping every Monday and Thursday, subscribe to the show on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow me and Ben on LinkedIn and visit zoominfo.com/labs to get in touch.